The question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the member for Dawson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak on the Albanese Labor Government's Agriculture Levies Bill 2024, Agricultural Charges Bill 2024 and the Agricultural Levies and Charges Collection Bill 2024. To me, these bills aren't just political, they are personal. These bills will hurt my people. The Albanese Labor Government is calling this a biosecurity protection levy, but let's call it for what it is. It's a tax. It is a tax on our hard-working, underappreciated and under-supported farmers who supply this country with the food and fibre we need to sustain life. It is a tax on the individuals and families who make their livelihoods working the land and who support our economy. It's a tax on those same individuals and families who are being ripped off at every turn by supply chains, by Mother Nature, by supermarkets, and now by the Albanese Labor Government. It's also a tax on every single person in Australia who is struggling through this Labor-created cost of living crisis. And the people of Australia have every right to be as appalled of this bill as I am. On January the 8th, 2022, the current Prime Minister tweeted this: "Our farmers deserve our respect for providing us with the essentials where we live. They need a government that listens to their concerns and acts on them." And then on January the 13th, 2022, the current Prime Minister reinforced his support for farmers by tweeting, "We will invest in the future made in Australia. We must make Australia more self-reliant, and that starts with ensuring our agricultural sector is thriving." On January the 2nd, 2024, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, sent out a media release announcing the ACCC inquiry into a supermarket price gouging, and in this it said, "We want a fair go for families and a fair go for farmers." Well, I have something to say to the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. If these two had any conviction whatsoever, they would not be doing this. As a third-generation farmer, the idea of being forced to pay for my competitors' imports and supply, it makes me sick to the stomach. What Australian government, in their right mind, would tax their own food producers, their own farmers, to pay for the biosecurity risks of their international competitors, to bring their competing products into Australia? No country in the world does this. And to their farmers and to their food producers, absolutely none. So why would we? Those opposite can't even make up their mind of how this policy is going to work. Firstly, they misguidedly but confidently announced we will hit Australian farmers with a bill equivalent to 10% of their existing industry-led agricultural levies, which, by the way, already collects $500 million a year that goes towards biosecurity activities, as well as research, innovation and development. Now, I'm no mathematician, but I think everyone in this room can figure out that 10% of $500 million a year is an enormous amount of money for already struggling industry. And then, in true Albanese Labor Government style, they flip-flop like a fish out of water before announcing they will be rejigging this tax. The Labor Government has now announced that they will set the new tax rate as a proportion of an industry average gross value of production for certain producers over a 3-year period, which is estimated to collect around $50 million each year over the next 3 years. And with a quick calculation, it's actually the same amount they were proposing to collect from the original model. Isn't that amazing? And at the same time, the legislation states that the rate of the levy can be set to nil. In the case, the cost of collecting the levy in some sectors actually exceeds the revenue raised by it. So not only do those opposite have no idea what they're actually doing with this legislation, they also actually haven't done our farmers any favours at all in rejigging this tax. Those opposite cannot even tell us who the relevant producers actually are when it comes to determining who will pay this new tax, or how much. Instead, the legislation only mentions certain producers, with the department saying at Senate estimates on the 13th of February 2024 that they will formally advise industries of their rate in the coming weeks or months. So I just want to make sure that I've got this right. This policy is set to come into effect on the 1st of July this year. The department will advise industries of their rate in coming weeks or months, and we're now at mid-March. So we've got April, May, June, which is, what, 3 months. So the Albanese Labor Government is so generous to the industry that they're going to give a whole 3 months' notice. And if not, well, too bad. Deputy Speaker, the arguments for this new tax aren't even sound. Those opposite say the Australian farmers should have to pay their fresh food tax because they benefit from strong biosecurity. The reality is that those opposite are ignoring the fact that our farmers already contribute to biosecurity through their existing industry-led agricultural levies. Those on the other side say the supermarkets are taking our farmers for a ride. However, Deputy Speaker, those guys are the ones operating the roller coaster. This is just another example of the Albanese Labor Government making policy on the run. It's another example of the Labor Government who is incompetent, directionless, and not across the detail of what they're proposing. The one thing that the Albanese Labor Government and his minister have done, though, is that they have managed to successfully unite every industry and organisation in their outrage against this policy. The scale of widespread concern about this policy was demonstrated back in December last year when 50 industry organisations co-signed a letter to the Prime Minister expressing their unified opposition and concern about this flawed proposal. 2 independent reviews on the Biosecurity Protection Levy, conducted by the Productivity Commission and the Australian National University, have found that this policy is flawed, with major issues surrounding who will be paying this tax. It is expected that it's not just for farmers that are captured under this levy, but also our fishers and our foresters. If this is true, you can almost say goodbye to Australia's world-class fishing industry completely. Deputy Speaker, everyone's heard me speak about the Minister for Environment and Water, Tanya Plibersek's decision to ban the use of commercial gillnet fishing, which will not only destroy an entire industry in my electorate of Dawson, it will drive down supply of Australian local wild-caught fish nationwide and ensure that we have to import lesser quality fish from international suppliers. The Albanese Labor Government now wants these producers to foot the bill for these importers. This is just ridiculous. You couldn't make this up. And what about the approximately 1,500 farmers and farm managers in my electorate of Dawson, who would normally employ more than 70,000 people? During a Labor-created cost of living crisis, when the cost of everything is going through the roof, this policy is going to be more severe and more detrimental and have massive impacts on farmers and families in my electorate. Farmers are already struggling with increased operational costs, a shortage of up to 174,000 workers Australia-wide, thanks to the Albanese Labor Government's decision to scrap the dedicated agriculture visa, enormous cuts to regional infrastructure and water projects, the Labor government's reckless race to renewables, which will see 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines that will rip through prime agricultural land, not to mention the thousands of hectares of native bushland and pristine farmland that will be decimated to make way for wind and solar farms, plus the announcement of a carbon tax on new vehicles that could see Australian farmers pay up to $25,000 more for a suitable vehicle just to do their job. Now, those opposite want to make these Aussie farmers pay more so that their international competitors can import goods into our country. And who do you think is going to wear those costs? The consumer, who is already being held hostage by a cost of living crisis. The consumer is inevitably going to end up paying more at the checkout. Tell me how this is fair. Under the Albanese Labor Government, our farmers have been under siege since the beginning. Every announcement and every policy sending shockwaves through the industry, even forcing the National Farmers Federation to take the extraordinary step of launching its largest protest campaign in almost 40 years, as Labor continues to decimate the industry and the regions. These decisions are not good enough, and I cannot in good conscience support these bills as they are here today. I could not go back to my electorate and look at the people in the face and tell them I am fighting for regional Australia if I supported these bills as they stand today. Deputy Speaker, the federal coalition does not underestimate the importance of biosecurity for our nation. In fact, our experiences and backgrounds mean that for most of us, we understand these risks better than anyone. We also understand the need for a sustainable and common sense approach, and what we have achieved from this Labor government, what we've seen and what we've received, is proof that they truly have no idea. In contrast, the Albanese Labor government, the federal coalition's approach to sustainably fund Australia's biosecurity system is targeted at the risk creators, and they are the importers themselves. It's quite simple. Those who pose the risk should pay the cost. And as the Leader of the Opposition announced in response to the May 2023 budget, instead of taxing farmers for biosecurity, the federal coalition will introduce an importer container levy, as recommended by the Create Biosecurity Review. Under the previous coalition government, we were well on our way implementing this approach, and then the Labor government decided not to continue with it. Those opposite will do and say anything to throw a good policy in the bin if it comes from a different side of politics, and even if it means destroying our nation's productivity and economy. The Prime Minister said, "No one left behind, everyone gets a fair go." Where is the fair go for our farmers and their families? The Prime Minister, you once said that farmers deserve our respect for providing us with essentials wherever we live, and that you need a government that listens to their concerns and acts on them. So where are you? Why aren't you listening? Our farmers are hurting. Our families are hurting. Our people are hurting. And our nation is hurting. And it all starts with the primary industries that the Prime Minister and his government are so intent on destroying. We all know the importance of biosecurity, but the biggest security risk to Australia right now is this current Albanese Labor government. Our farmers are in for the fight of their lives, and if we lose this fight, we all lose. I will stand shoulder to shoulder with our farmers and fight to get rid of this outrageous tax. After all, without...
Authorised by Andrew Wilcox, LNP Mackay.